The drawing room at Ashwell Park had been arranged with particular care that morning, which was to say that Lady Constance Wyndham had positioned every chair, every side table, and every branch of flowers with the silent authority of a woman who understood that arrangement was a form of argument. The three young women invited to take tea that afternoon had been placed at measured angles from Lord Evander Wyndham, Earl of Ashwell, so that each might observe him and be observed in turn. The footman had been instructed to pour the moment the company was settled. The dog had been removed to the stables. Evander had not requested any of this. He had not, in truth, requested the tea at all. He sat now at a slight remove from the group, one leg extended at an angle that suggested inconvenience, his right hand resting on the silver-handled walking stick his mother had procured from somewhere in the house, though he had never seen it before that morning. His expression was exactly what it always was, composed and even and entirely unreadable to people who did not know him well. His mother knew him tolerably well. She had not, he suspected, noticed the precise quality of stillness that came over him when he was paying very close attention to something he did not yet understand. Miss Harriet Pembroke was the first to speak. "What an affliction it must be," she said, her gaze settling on the walking stick with an expression that was meant to convey sympathy and conveyed instead a swift, barely perceptible calculation. "To be confined to such an aid at your age, my lord, the season must be particularly trying for you." "It has its difficulties," Evander said. His voice was level. He watched Miss Pembroke's eyes track toward Miss Alderton, who sat beside her, and he watched the small private smile that moved between them. It was the smile of two women conducting a shared assessment, the kind of reassurance that passes when both parties have reached the same conclusion, and one of them wishes to confirm it. Evander had been watching that particular exchange for 11 years, from drawing rooms in town to country houses in autumn. He had learned, at considerable cost, what it meant. He did not look away from them. What he had not looked at, not yet, was the far side of the room, near the window where the light came in long and flat and late afternoon gold. He had noticed her, as one notices something that is precisely where it ought not to be. A maid in a plain gray dress with a white apron, carrying a tray of small cakes from the corridor, moving through the furniture with the practiced quiet of someone accustomed to not being seen. She had paused at the threshold when the teacups rattled, and she had set the tray down on the small table beside the credenza. And she had not looked at him. She had looked at the window. He had perhaps 2 seconds before Miss Pembroke turned back to him with another question. He used one of those seconds to observe the maid's profile against the afternoon light, the way she had gone very still when Miss Alderton laughed. She had not laughed with them. Miss Alderton had murmured something to Miss Pembroke, and Miss Pembroke had pressed her lips together in the controlled, polished expression of a woman suppressing amusement in company, and the third guest, Miss Forsyth, had looked quickly at her lap. The maid had simply set down the last of the small plates and straightened her spine and moved toward the door, as though the laughter had been a sound she had heard before and had decided some time ago not to carry. Evander watched her go. If you have ever watched a room reveal itself, the moment tends to be quiet. Come and stay, and you will see what I mean. Lady Constance Wyndham had brought 3 young women to Ashwell Park for the last week of August. This was not unusual. Since Evander had turned 31 and declined to appear in town for the previous 2 seasons, his mother had redirected her efforts. She could not compel him to London. She could populate his own countryside with suitable candidates. She was a practical woman. The entail on the Ashwell estates passed through the male line, and Evander had no brothers. There were 3,000 acres that needed an heir, and a house that needed a mistress, and a mother who had been waiting 3 years for both. What his mother did not know was that Evander had tried this before. He had been engaged at 24. Her name had been Miss Cecily Farrow, and she had been charming. And he had believed himself fortunate. And he had been wrong about that in the specific, quiet way that one is wrong about a thing one never sufficiently questioned. Cecily had been charming in drawing rooms and at dinner parties and in morning visits and in all the prescribed settings where charm was what was called for. She had been something quite different in private, in small, unscheduled moments, in the moments when she believed she was not performing for anyone who mattered. He had not understood what he was seeing in those moments until 6 months before the wedding, when he had been thrown from a horse in a field with no one watching, and he had lain in the grass for 20 minutes unable to rise, and she had ridden past him at a distance with 3 other young women, and she had not stopped. She had not known he was watching. He had not broken off the engagement himself. He had asked his solicitor to make the arrangements, and then he had spent 3 months in the north of England attending to a state business that could perfectly well have waited, and when he returned, he had given away the horse and taken up walking, and he had not spoken of Miss Farrow since except to his mother, once, briefly, in terms that had closed the subject. That had been 7 years ago. He had told his mother nothing of the test, only of the outcome. He had told no one of the test. It had not been a formal thing, not a plan he had set in motion deliberately. It had simply been a truth he had discovered about himself, that he could not trust what people showed him in the spaces where they knew they were being watched. He needed to see what they did when they thought there was nothing at stake. The walking stick had been his mother's idea, in the sense that she had suggested he greet this particular group of guests with some warmth, and it had been his idea, in the sense that he had understood immediately what form that warmth would take. 3 days ago, he had taken the stick from the umbrella stand in the entrance hall, and he had said nothing to anyone, and when he had appeared at dinner that evening with it, his valet, Stokes, had looked at him for a long moment with the expression of a man who has seen a great deal in service and has learned precisely when not to speak. He was watching, now, to see what the house revealed. The maid's name was Nora Blackwell. He had asked Stokes that evening, very quietly, after the tea things had been cleared and Miss Pembroke had gone upstairs to change. Stokes had paused before answering, the pause of a man deciding how much latitude he was being given. "Nora Blackwell, my lord. She came to us 3 months ago. Mrs. Hatton will have her record, if you require it." "That will not be necessary," Evander said. He had gone to bed. She was not new to service. He could see that in the way she moved through a room, the practiced economy of a woman who had learned to carry things without spilling them, to work in inhabited spaces without disturbing their inhabitants, to perform her function as though she occupied a separate layer of the world from the people she served. She was not young, not in the way of a girl new to the work. She was perhaps 23 or 24, with the quality of stillness that comes not from training, but from practice. From having been still for long enough that it had become the natural shape of her. She had brown hair pinned under her cap. She had gray eyes, or perhaps green. He had not been close enough to determine. She moved with a slight forward lean at the shoulder. Not a stoop. More the angle of a person always ready to attend to something at hand. Her hands were red at the knuckle from the work. The apron was ironed. He saw her again the following morning in the corridor outside the library, carrying an armful of window weights that had come loose from the curtains in the east room and needed to be returned to the housekeeper's stores. She was moving quickly, head down, and she did not see him until she was 3 feet away, and then she stopped. "My lord," she said, and shifted the weights to her left arm to free her right, in case she needed to open a door for him. He had forgotten the walking stick. He had left it in his room. He was standing on both feet, entirely normally, 2 yards from the door of the library, and there was nothing the matter with his leg at all. She looked at his feet. She looked at his face. A single thing moved in her expression, the faint, involuntary adjustment of someone registering information they did not expect. And then it settled, and she said nothing. He said nothing either. She stepped to the side to let him pass, and he passed, and he went into the library and did not come out for 20 minutes, during which time he stood at the window and looked at the kitchen garden below, and thought about what her expression had meant. She had not smiled. She had not suppressed a smile. She had seen him standing without the stick, and she had simply registered the fact, the way one registers a change in weather, without anything in her face that suggested she found it useful or amusing or worth remarking upon. The thing he had expected to see, the small gleam of calculation, the private assessment, the pleasure a person takes in knowing a secret that might advantage them, none of it had been there. What had been there was harder to name, a kind of care, perhaps, not pity, something more contained than pity, closer to a private determination not to add to whatever weight she could see the person before her was already carrying. He had not seen that look on a face outside of Stokes in 7 years. He spent the next morning in the East Wing with his steward, Cartwright, going over the autumn accounts. He spent the afternoon riding. He ate dinner with his mother and her 3 guests, and listened to Miss Alderton play the pianoforte, which she did with great technical proficiency and no apparent feeling whatsoever. He answered his mother's conversational overtures with the appropriate brevity, and he answered Miss Pembroke's more pointed inquiries about his plans for the London season with a patience he had developed over years, and he looked once at the sideboard, and then did not look again. She was not there. Of course, she was not there. She served in the upper rooms, not in the dining room. He was not sure why he had looked. He found the occasion to observe her 3 more times in the following week, each time without intending to. Once in the morning room, where she was replacing a broken candle sconce while Miss Forsyth sat writing letters at the desk, and gave no indication of being aware that anyone else was in the room. Once on the stairs, where she was descending with a pile of laundered linens as he was ascending. And she stopped on the landing to let him pass, and he noticed that the topmost sheet had a small darned place at the corner, done in a thread that nearly but not exactly matched the original, and he noticed this only because she had noticed it first, her finger touching it briefly as though confirming the repair had held. Once through the window of the library, looking down at the kitchen garden where she and one of the younger maids were shelling peas in the late afternoon, and the younger maid was talking a great deal, and Nora was listening with her whole face turned toward the girl, and she said something that made the younger maid laugh, and then laugh again, and the second laugh was real. Miss Pembroke came into the library at 3:30 to inform him that his mother had proposed croquet on the lawn, and would he join them? He said yes. He followed her out. He did not look back at the window. 2 days later, in the gallery that ran along the upper north corridor, he came around a corner and found her sitting on the floor. This was itself unusual enough that he stopped. She was sitting with her back against the wainscoting, her legs extended in front of her, her hands in her lap, and her eyes were closed. She was not asleep. Her face had the concentrated stillness of a person attempting to control something they would rather not show. Her left shoe was removed and set beside her. "Miss Blackwell," he said. She opened her eyes. She did not startle. The movement from close to open was steady, deliberate. The movement of someone who had heard him approach and had taken the 2 seconds before his voice to prepare. "My lord," she said, and moved as though to rise. "Remain where you are," he said. He said it quickly, which was not his usual register. He amended it. "I would prefer you did not rise on my account." She remained. He looked at the shoe. He looked at her foot in its stocking, and he could see, even from where he stood, that her ankle was swollen at the inside edge. "You have injured your ankle," he said. "I turned it on the step," she said. "It is not serious, my lord. I will be quite capable of returning to my duties in a moment." She said it without the quality that usually attended such reassurances. The anxious, slightly performative brightness of someone hoping not to be dismissed. She said it because she believed it, because it was the accurate assessment of a person accustomed to evaluating her own body's tolerances and proceeding accordingly. She had turned her ankle. She was sitting for 2 minutes. She would then return to work. These were not 3 things requiring apology. "How long has it been swollen?" he said. "Since yesterday morning," she said. And then she closed her mouth briefly, as though she had given more information than she intended. "You have been working on it since yesterday morning." "Yes, my lord." He looked at the corridor. He looked at the sconce that was still dark at the far end, which was why she had come up here. "The sconce at the end of the corridor," he said. "It has been reported to Mr. Cartwright," she said. "I came to assess whether the fitting itself required replacing or only the candle." "And?" "The fitting," she said. "The bracket pin has sheared. Someone will need to come with the proper tool." He took note of this in the way one takes note of a thing that will need attending. He did not move immediately. He was aware that she was waiting for him to move so that she could stand and resume her work, and he was aware that standing would cost her something she was not prepared to acknowledge, and he was aware that he was under no social obligation to prolong this exchange, and was prolonging it anyway. "The house has many things that require attending," he said, which was not what he had meant to say. She looked at him. "It is a large house, my lord," she said, and the way she said it carried no irony, only a kind of plain, accurate understanding of what a large house was and what it required. He left her then. He went back down the stairs and found his mother in the morning room and told her that the fitting on the north corridor sconce needed replacing, and she said she would speak to Mrs. Hatton, and he said he thought it would be better to speak to Cartwright directly. And his mother looked at him with the particular expression of a woman who has been managing her son for 31 years and finds that she is still, occasionally, surprised by him. That evening, Miss Pembroke found an occasion to speak with him on the terrace after dinner. The moon was very nearly full, and the grounds were silver and shadow. And she stood beside him at the balustrade with her hands folded, and she said, with the careful directness of a woman who has decided to be frank rather than risk losing the opportunity, that she hoped he would not think her bold for saying that she had observed a significant improvement in his walking over the past several days. He turned to look at her. "An improvement," he said. "I had not liked to mention it earlier," she said, "but I have been watching rather closely, and it seems to me that your dependence on the walking stick has been considerably reduced this week. I confess I found it a relief. I had wondered whether the affliction was more serious than you had intimated." She was watching him with the composed, slightly hungry expression of a woman who has spent a week performing an assessment and is now presenting her conclusion. She was not cruel. She was a woman of good family and reasonable intelligence, who had understood from a young age that the world required her to be strategic, and who had been strategic without ever asking whether strategy and candor might not sometimes pull in the same direction. He said nothing for a moment. "Tell me," he said at last, "what did you intend by watching closely?" She did not hesitate. "I intended to understand your situation accurately," she said. "It seemed wise." He considered that. He thought of the morning in the field outside Bath, the horse, the grass, the long quiet that had followed. He thought of what it meant to watch someone closely, and what it was you were hoping to find. "You are not incorrect that there has been an improvement," he said. "Good night, Miss Pembroke." She had had the grace not to press him. He went inside. He told Stokes that night to put the walking stick away. What remained was a question he had no particular skill for answering. He was a man accustomed to the management of large practical problems, tenants and drainage, and the price of grain, and the slow, necessary work of keeping 3,000 acres producing. He was not accustomed to the management of whatever this was, this awareness that had taken up residence in him like an extra presence in a room, not demanding attention, but refusing to be dismissed. He knew her name. He knew she had been at Ashwell for 3 months. He knew she worked with the careful efficiency of someone who had been doing this work for long enough to have stripped it of everything that was not necessary. He knew that when his mother's guests had laughed, she had not laughed with them. He knew that she had seen him without the stick and had not made use of it. He did not know, and had no proper right to ask anything else. It was his mother who provided the occasion, though not intentionally. 3 days before the company was due to depart, Lady Constance called a small meeting in the morning room to discuss the arrangements for the final dinner. Evander attended. Nora attended also, in her capacity as one of the senior maids, along with Mrs. Hatton, the housekeeper, whose competence was such that she required very little direction and gave it freely to everyone else. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. Evander said almost nothing. He listened to his mother describe her vision for the table settings, to Mrs. Hatton agree with measured precision to everything achievable and negotiate with equal precision around everything that was not, and to Nora answer questions put directly to her with the same quality he had come to recognize. The brief, accurate response. Nothing added that was not asked for. The whole delivered with a composure that had nothing to show off. His mother said, "I believe the pale blue cloth would do better than the ivory." And Nora said, "The pale blue has a small repair at one corner, my lady, which would fall near the center of the table." And his mother said, "That is unfortunate." And Nora said, "The ivory would serve well, my lady." And that was the end of it. He watched the side of her face. He watched her make a small notation in the household book she carried, the same movement of the pen twice, precise and unhurried. And he watched her consider the notation for 1 second, as though confirming it accurately recorded what she had meant. After the meeting, as the room was emptying, he said her name. She turned. Mrs. Hatton was already in the corridor. His mother had paused at the door. "A moment," he said to the room in general, and his mother withdrew with the expression of a woman who is not sure what she is witnessing, but is inclined to give it room. Nora waited. She held the household book against her chest, both hands flat against it, and she looked at him with a quality of attention that was not wariness, not the alert stillness of someone who is afraid of what is coming. It was steadier than that. It was the attention of a person who has decided, some time ago, to simply see whatever there was to see. "The North Corridor sconce," he said. "Was it repaired?" "Yes, my lord. Cartwright attended to it on Tuesday." "Good." He paused. He had not planned what came after that. "Your ankle." "Quite recovered, my lord." "I am glad of it," he said. And then, because that was not sufficient, he said, "I noticed the household book. The notation you made during the meeting was more detailed than was strictly required." She looked at the book. She looked at him. "I find it is better to be precise," she said, "when precision costs nothing additional." He held that for a moment. "That has been my own observation," he said. She did not say anything further. She was waiting to see whether there was something specific being asked of her, and there was not. Not in any form he could make respectable. And they both understood this. and in that understanding something passed between them that was not quite a decision and not quite an acknowledgement, and was perhaps merely the recognition that they were two people who had been paying attention to the same things and had now, briefly, been in the same room. He said, "Thank you, Miss Blackwell. That will be all." She went out. He stood in the morning room for a full minute after. What he did next was not precipitate. He spent an evening going over it with the care he applied to everything, turning it from each angle as he turned drainage proposals and crop rotations and the slow, binding decisions that shaped the years ahead. He had 3,000 acres and a house and a title that had come to him at 22 with his father's death, and he had managed all of it with the kind of steady, unglamorous attention that kept things viable, and he had been in the habit of believing that his private life was simply a different order of the same management. He had been wrong. It was not management. It was something that had waited, quietly, for a specific quality of person. And the waiting had been neither noble nor interesting, merely patient, the way a house waits to be properly inhabited. He went to his mother the following morning. She was in the small sitting room that she had occupied since his father's death, a room he associated entirely with her and with the smell of dried lavender and the stack of correspondence she kept in a lacquered box on the writing table. She looked up when he came in and set down her pen. He sat. "I would like to know what you know of her," he said. His mother said nothing for a long moment. She had, he knew, been observing him for 3 weeks, with the specific attentiveness of a woman watching for something she could not yet name. He thought perhaps she had been watching longer than that. "She came to us from the Colborne household in Derbyshire," his mother said at last, carefully. "Her father was a solicitor's clerk in Macclesfield. He died when she was 19, and the family had nothing settled. She has a younger sister she supports." She paused. "Mrs. Hatton has spoken well of her." "Very well." He waited to see if there was more. "Evander," his mother said. "I brought 3 young women here." "I know," he said. "I have answered every question they put to me with perfect courtesy for 3 weeks. They are very suitable." "I know that also." His mother was quiet for a moment. She was, he knew, a woman who was capable of 2 kinds of silence. The silence of a woman who had not yet decided what to say, and the silence of a woman who had already decided and was giving the other person time to arrive at the same place. This was the second kind. "She is a maid in your house," she said. "She is a person whose regard I find I should like to earn," he said. "I do not think those 2 facts are settled in the way you mean." His mother looked at him for a long time. She looked at the place where the walking stick would have been, if he had still been carrying it. She looked at his face. "If this comes to nothing," she said finally, "I will be obliged to bring the Pembroke girl back in November." "If it comes to nothing," he said, "you may do as you see fit in November." He spoke to Mrs. Hatton that afternoon. He spoke to Cartwright that evening. He asked for a formal interview with Nora the following morning in the library, with the door open and Mrs. Hatton present, as propriety required. She came at 10 o'clock, as requested. She wore the same gray dress. She sat in the chair across from his desk with the household book in her lap, though he had not asked her to bring it, and her hands were settled on top of it, and she looked at him directly. He told her what he intended to tell her, which was that he had observed her over the course of 3 weeks with a specific quality of attention that he wished to account for honestly, rather than allow to proceed without her knowledge. He told her that he was aware of the disproportion of what he was about to say, and that he had no wish to place her in a difficulty. He told her that he had a question to ask her, and the question was whether she would permit him to present his consideration to her over the course of a reasonable period, with all proper observances, so that she might determine for herself whether she found his character sufficient. She was very still while he spoke. When he finished, she did not answer immediately. She looked at the household book. She looked at the window. She was doing something with her face. The kind of careful, precise internal sorting that she appeared to do with most things. Cataloging what was being said against what she knew, checking the result for accuracy. "You are aware," she said at last, "that I am in service in your house." "Yes," he said. "And that my father was a solicitor's clerk and left nothing." "Yes," he said. "I am also aware that you have a sister to support, and that you turned an ankle in the performance of your duties and worked on it for 2 days without complaint, and that when you observed something unusual in this house you did not make use of it, and that when the rest of the room laughed at something not worth laughing at, you did not laugh with them." She was quiet for a long moment. "How did you know," she said, "that I had seen you without the stick?" "The way your expression changed," he said. And then the way it settled. She looked at him with the same expression she had worn in the corridor that morning, the steady, careful registration of something she had not expected to find. Something in her face, the careful, neutral composure of it, shifted slightly. Not toward warmth. Not yet, but toward the possibility of warmth. The way a room shifts when someone opens a curtain that has been closed for some time. "I will need to consider it," she said. "I would expect nothing less," he said. She considered it for 4 days. During those 4 days, the house guests departed. Miss Pembroke left first on a Tuesday in a well-appointed carriage with a trunk that required 3 footmen, and she said her goodbyes to Evander with a composure that was the product of very good breeding and a quick intelligence that had already recalculated its situation. She wished him well, and he believed she meant it, and he thanked her for her company, and he meant that also. Miss Alderton and Miss Forsyth followed on Thursday. His mother stood on the steps and waved them off, and then she went inside without speaking, and she did not speak to him again until dinner, when she said only, "The house is very quiet now." And he said, "Yes." And they ate in the particular quiet of 2 people who are each thinking about the same thing and have agreed, silently, not to discuss it yet. On Friday afternoon, Nora came to the library. She did not knock, which was not the usual practice. He had said she might come when she was ready, and she had understood this to mean she need not announce herself, and he was grateful for that understanding. She came in and stood on the near side of the desk, not in the chair this time, standing, and she had the household book in her hands again. She said, "I would like to ask you something before I answer." "Yes," he said. "The walking stick," she said. "Why?" He did not deflect. "I was engaged once. The woman I was engaged to did not know what I would require of her until she believed she had privacy to show it. I could not know, until then, what she would do." He paused. "I do not speak of it generally. I tell you because you asked, and because it is relevant, and because I do not want to begin this by concealing anything that bears on the question." She turned this over. "You were watching all of them," she said. "Yes." She looked at the household book. She turned it once in her hands. Then she set it down on the edge of his desk, the way one sets down something one has been carrying for a long time and has decided it is appropriate, finally, to put down. "Yes," she said. He stood up from the desk. He was, as she was, a person of few words when the essential ones were available, and yes was the essential word, and it was sufficient. He crossed the library to where she stood. He stopped a foot away, because to come closer without leave was not something he would do. And he looked at her, and she looked at him. And her face was no longer the composed, neutral surface she moved through the house wearing. It was something else. It was a face that knew it had been seen. He said, "Nora." She said nothing. She put her hand out, palm up, not reaching for him, just held out. And he took it in both of his, careful of the redness at the knuckle, and the warmth of it moved through him, like something opening. They stood like that for a moment in the quiet library, the afternoon light coming long through the west windows and lying gold across the floor. And outside a robin was singing in the kitchen garden below. And inside there was only the small, steady reality of her hand in both of his, and the breathing of two people who had been patient for a long time. He did not kiss her that afternoon. He did not press for anything that propriety required to be earned. He held her hand, and she did not take it away. And that was, for now, precisely everything. His mother required 3 more conversations before she was reconciled to it, and those conversations were not easy, and he did not expect them to be. What he told her, each time, was the truth as plainly as he could render it, that he had been watching, and that he had seen, and that what he had seen was a person who did not require an audience to be herself. His mother was a woman who had built her life inside a set of social convictions that were as real to her as the walls of the house, and it was no small thing to ask her to revise them, and he did not pretend it was small. What he said, finally, in the 3rd conversation, was the plainest thing he knew. She saw something she might have used, and she did not use it. I have been waiting a long time to find that. His mother was quiet for a very long time after that. What followed was proper and slow and managed with the kind of care that large, consequential things deserve. There were formal arrangements to be made, and his mother's solicitor to be consulted, and a letter to be written to Nora's younger sister, whose name was Elspeth, and who replied, within a fortnight, in a hand so like her sister's that he recognized it immediately. 3 pages of practical, direct inquiry that he answered point by point with the same precision she had clearly been trained to expect. There was one evening in November, before the engagement was formally announced, when he and Nora sat together in the library, with a small fire going, and the wind off the moors coming cold against the windows, and she was reading, and he was writing letters, and they were not talking. They had found, with some surprise, that they could be quiet together without the quiet becoming a demand. She had a particular habit, when she was reading, of touching the corner of the page before she turned it, confirming it was separate from the one beneath. And he noticed this habit without noting it aloud, and she noticed that he had noticed, and she said nothing, and he said nothing, and the fire went on burning. She had brought a small wooden box from her room, which she kept on the table beside her chair. It had belonged to her father. She had told him once, briefly, the same way she told him everything that mattered. Once, briefly, in terms that did not require amplification. A clerk's box, plain and worn at the corners, smelling of old papers and the lavender she had kept inside it since his death. She set it down, and she picked it up, and she did not explain it further. And he did not ask. In the spring, when the grounds were green again, and the morning room was full of light, he watched her walk the kitchen garden with Elspeth, who had come to stay for a fortnight. And the 2 sisters walked with their heads together in the way of people who have been a long time apart and are catching up on something that cannot be caught up with entirely. And now and then Nora laughed, and the sound of it was not the laugh she had given the young maid in the kitchen garden the previous autumn. More private than that, more unguarded, and it reached him across the grass and through the open window. Stokes, who had come in to set the desk to rights, paused for a moment, and then continued. He had not, to anyone's observation, said a word about the walking stick, not to the other servants, not in any quarter. Evander had not thanked him for this, because it had not required thanks. It had been the kind of service that needed no acknowledgement to be understood. He looked out at the garden until his business called him back to his letters. The box from her father sat now on the mantel in the library, next to a small watercolor of the moors that she had done herself, in the months when she was still learning what this house could hold of her. She had not apologized for the painting. She had set it down, and he had looked at it, and they had both known it belonged there. Outside, the apple trees were coming into bloom. If you felt what Nora carried, that long patience, the weight of being seen through, the quieter weight of being seen clearly at last, tell us what you noticed. Come back, and bring someone with you. She did not ask him later why he had put the stick away. She had known the moment she came into the library that Friday by the way he stood, by the quality of attention he gave to the threshold as she crossed it, that whatever had been under consideration had been decided. She had accepted this without ceremony. He was glad of that. He had always found ceremony slightly beside the point, except at the moments when the point and the ceremony were, for once, the same thing. There had been one such moment, in January, before the vicar in the small cold church at the end of the estate lane, with his mother and Elspeth and Stokes and 3 of the longest-serving tenants in attendance, when Nora had looked up at him in her cream-colored gown, the wooden box carried instead of flowers, because she had said simply that she wished to carry something that had already loved her, and he had understood completely, and he had taken her hand, and the cold church had seemed, for the first time in his memory, warm. The robin was back in the kitchen garden in May. She told him about it at breakfast, with the particular pleasure of a person reporting something small and good, and he said he had noticed it also, and she looked at him with the expression he had come to know best on her face, the one that moved just below composure, warm and clear and entirely without performance. He poured her tea.